Arizona Territory, 1867. The schoolhouse windows caught the last golden rays of sunset as Charlotte Whitmore organized her desk for the following day. At 24, she had spent 3 years building something of her own in the mining town of Copper Ridge, something far from Boston's suffocating propriety and the whispers that had followed her after James's betrayal. "Miss Whitmore." Charlotte looked up to find Eliza, the blacksmith's 10-year-old daughter, lingering in the doorway. "I finished it," Eliza said, proudly extending a small book. "Just like you asked." Charlotte smiled, taking the dog-eared copy of Little Women from the girl's hands. "And what did you think of Jo?" "She reminds me of you," Eliza replied, strong and not afraid to speak her mind. Charlotte felt warmth spread across her cheeks. In Boston, such qualities had earned her nothing but scorn. Here, in this rough-edged town, they were her salvation. "You'd better hurry home," Charlotte said, glancing out the window at the darkening sky. "Your father will worry." After Eliza departed, Charlotte gathered her belongings, extinguished the lantern, and locked the schoolhouse door. The walk to her small cabin at the edge of town was familiar, past the general store where Mr. Finch gave her credit when mining was slow, beyond the saloon where she never lingered, and finally past Sheriff Miller's office, where he tipped his hat with reliable courtesy. "Evening, Miss Whitmore," the sheriff called as she passed. "Sheriff," she acknowledged with a nod. "Quiet day." "As can be hoped for," he replied, but something in his expression gave her pause. "Though I've heard rumors of the Lancaster gang moving north from Tucson." Charlotte's heart stuttered. The Lancaster gang, notorious for their brutality, especially toward women. "I thought they'd been driven into Mexico." "So did we all," Sheriff Miller said grimly. "Keep your doors locked tight tonight." Charlotte hurried the rest of the way home, the sheriff's warning echoing in her mind. Inside her cabin, she bolted the door and drew the curtains before lighting a small oil lamp. The tiny space held her few possessions, books mostly, some clothes, and a small photograph of her parents, gone 5 years now. Sleep came fitfully that night, haunted by dreams of Boston drawing rooms and James's smile that never quite reached his eyes. In her dreams she heard horses' hooves, distant at first, then closer. When she woke with a start, the sound had not stopped. The night erupted with gunfire and screams. Charlotte scrambled from her bed, fumbling for her robe. The orange glow of fire flickered through her windows. Heart pounding, she cracked open her door to see riders, at least 20, thundering down the town's main street, torches in hand, guns blazing. The Lancaster gang had come. Frozen in terror, Charlotte watched as they set fire to the general store. Mr. Finch ran out, only to be cut down by a bullet. His wife followed, her screams silenced in the same manner. The saloon erupted in flames next, then the bank. When they turned toward the row of homes, Charlotte knew she couldn't stay. Throwing on her clothes, she grabbed her mother's locket, the small pouch of coins she'd saved, and her father's old pocket knife. Through her back window, she slipped into the darkness just as flames engulfed her front porch. She ran blindly toward the hills beyond town, the screams of her neighbors driving her forward. A bullet whizzed past her ear, splintering the bark of a nearby pine. Charlotte ducked, heart threatening to burst from her chest, and veered deeper into the darkness. Dawn found her huddled in a narrow ravine, miles from what remained of Copper Ridge. Smoke still rose in the distance, a gray smudge against the pink morning sky. Charlotte's throat burned with thirst, her feet bloodied from running across rocky terrain in thin shoes. Her dress was torn, her face streaked with soot and tears. For 3 days she wandered, surviving on rainwater collected in rock depressions and the few berries she recognized as safe. On the 4th day, stumbling with exhaustion, she crested a rise and saw it, a cavalry outpost in the valley below. Hope surged through her veins, giving her strength for the final descent. But as she drew closer, she realized something was wrong. The fort was abandoned, doors hanging open, supplies scattered. "They left 2 weeks ago," a deep voice said from behind her. Charlotte whirled, fumbling for her father's knife. The man who stood there made her blood run cold, tall and copper-skinned, with black hair hanging in 2 long braids, framing a face as impassive as stone. He wore buckskin leggings and a cotton shirt, with a bandana tied around his forehead. Most terrifying were his eyes, dark as midnight and fixed on her with unnerving intensity. "Apache," Stories of Apache brutality had circulated through Copper Ridge like ghost tales, scalping, torture, women taken as slaves. Charlotte raised the knife, though her hand trembled visibly. "Stay back," she warned, her voice cracking. The man's expression didn't change. "That knife will not save you from dying of thirst," he said in perfect, if accented English. "Or from the men who hunt you." Charlotte's heart skipped. "What men?" "The ones who destroyed your town. They search for survivors." He nodded toward the south. "3 riders, following your trail." Terror seized her anew. The knife suddenly felt useless in her grip. "How do you know about the town?" "I saw the smoke. I watched them kill." His face remained impassive. "You are the schoolteacher." It wasn't a question. Charlotte swallowed hard. "How would you know that?" "I have seen you. With the children." He stepped forward, and Charlotte retreated until her back hit the fort's weathered wall. "You have 2 choices. Die here, by thirst, by their bullets, or by the desert, or come with me." "Why would you help me?" Charlotte demanded, knife still extended. Something flickered in his eyes. Not kindness exactly, but perhaps a shade less coldness. "I have my reasons." "What's your name?" she asked, desperate to evaluate this unexpected, dangerous offer. "My people call me Toro," he replied. "Like the bull?" The Spanish word slipped out before she could think better of it. A slight nod. "For my stubbornness." "And yours?" Charlotte Whitmore." Toro studied her for a long moment. "The men who hunt you will be here before sundown. Decide now, Charlotte Whitmore." A distant whinny carried on the wind, horses approaching from the south. Charlotte thought of the Lancasters, of what they had done to Mrs. Finch before killing her. She looked at Toro's impassive face and made her choice. "I'll go with you." Without another word, Toro turned and led her away from the fort, toward the shadow of distant mountains. Charlotte followed, leaving behind the last remnants of the life she had built, stepping into unknown darkness with a man whose very people represented terror in the stories white settlers told. The irony wasn't lost on her, fleeing white men whose cruelty she had witnessed firsthand, into the protection of an Apache whose cruelty she had only heard in tales. By sunset, they had traveled miles through rocky terrain. Charlotte's feet, already raw from her days of wandering, left small bloodstains on the stones behind them. Toro moved with silent efficiency, pausing occasionally to listen or study the horizon. He offered no conversation, no reassurance. As darkness fell, he led her to a small cave tucked into a hillside. "Rest," he commanded, the first word he had spoken in hours. From a pouch at his waist he produced dried meat and handed her a water skin. "Eat, then sleep." Charlotte devoured the tough, salty meat and drank deeply of the water, though she knew she should ration it. "Thank you," she said quietly. Toro didn't respond, but moved to the cave entrance where he settled, a silhouette against the deepening night. "Where are we going?" Charlotte ventured. For a moment she thought he would ignore her question. Then, without turning, "To my people." "And what will happen to me there?" This time he did turn, his face half illuminated by the rising moon. "That depends on what you are willing to do to survive." A chill ran through Charlotte that had nothing to do with the desert night. "What does that mean?" Toro studied her with those unfathomable eyes. "A woman alone has no place among my people. Or yours." He paused. "But a wife would be protected." Understanding dawned slowly. "You want me to marry you?" The concept seemed absurd, impossible. "It would be a marriage of protection only," Toro clarified, his voice matter-of-fact. "You would have safety, food, shelter." "And what would you have?" Charlotte demanded, suspicion flaring. "My reasons are my own," he replied. Then, perhaps seeing the fear in her eyes, added, "I will not touch you. That is not why I offer this." Charlotte wrapped her arms around herself, mind racing. Marriage to an Apache warrior, the very idea was shocking. Yet what choice did she have? Return to white settlements where the Lancaster gang might find her, where a woman alone would face suspicion at best, predation at worst. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Until morning," Toro agreed, turning back to his watch. Charlotte lay down on the hard cave floor, certain sleep would never come. Yet exhaustion claimed her. pulling her into darkness where nightmares of burning buildings and James's betrayal mingled with strange new dreams of desert vistas and a pair of obsidian eyes that revealed nothing, yet saw everything. Morning came with painful clarity. Charlotte awoke to find Toro already moving about the cave, preparing to leave. Her body ached from days of flight and the hard stone bed. "Have you decided?" he asked without preamble. Charlotte pushed herself upright, wincing at her blistered feet. The harsh light of day made the previous night's conversation seem surreal, yet the reality of her situation remained unchanged. "Yes," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I accept your offer, but there must be conditions." Toro's eyebrow lifted slightly, the first real expression she had seen on his face. "This arrangement is temporary," Charlotte continued, finding strength in the familiar territory of negotiation, "until I can establish myself elsewhere safely. And as you said, you will not expect certain marital rights." "Is that all?" he asked, a hint of something almost like amusement in his tone. Charlotte lifted her chin. "I will not be treated as property or a slave. I am entering this arrangement of my own free will, for mutual benefit." Toro considered her for a long moment. "Among my people, women are not property. They are the heart of the family, the strength of the tribe." He stepped closer, his presence filling the small cave. "My protection comes with respect, Charlotte Whitmore. Do not mistake my silence for disdain." Something in his words, in the quiet dignity with which he spoke them, caught Charlotte off guard. For the first time, she looked at him not as a savage or a reluctant savior, but as a man. "Then we have an agreement," she said softly. Toro nodded once. "We travel now. The journey is long." They set out as the morning sun climbed higher, casting harsh shadows across the desert landscape. Charlotte's feet protested each step, but she bit back complaints. Toro seemed to notice anyway. Midday, he stopped beside a small stream. "Remove your shoes," he instructed. Charlotte hesitated, then complied. Her stockings were in tatters, her feet raw and bleeding. Without comment, Toro knelt before her. From a pouch, he produced crushed herbs mixed with animal fat. With surprising gentleness, his strong hands spread the mixture over her wounds. The cooling relief was immediate. "Thank you," Charlotte whispered, unnerved by his closeness, by the unexpected tenderness from this stoic warrior. Toro merely nodded, tearing strips from his own shirt to bind her feet. "These will protect until we reach the camp. There you will have proper moccasins." As they continued their journey, Charlotte found herself studying her companion, the straight line of his back, the silent grace with which he moved. She had been raised on tales of savage Indians, yet this man had shown her nothing but competence and a stern kind of consideration. "How did you learn to speak English so well?" she asked as they navigated a narrow canyon. Toro was silent so long, she thought he would not answer. Then, "I was taken to the white man's school when I was a boy. For 7 years." Charlotte heard volumes in those simple words, none of it pleasant. "I'm sorry." "For what?" he asked without turning. "That you were taken from your family." This time he did pause, glancing back at her with an unreadable expression. "Most white women would say it was for my own good, to civilize the savage." Charlotte met his gaze steadily. "I've seen enough of civilization these past days to question its virtue." Something flickered in Toro's eyes, surprise perhaps or reassessment. With a slight nod he turned and continued walking, but the silence between them felt somehow different. As the sun began to set on their second day of travel, they crested a rise overlooking a hidden valley. Below, tucked against the base of a mountain, Charlotte saw the Apache camp, dozens of wickiups arranged in a loose circle, smoke rising from cooking fires. Women moved between them, children played, and warriors stood guard at the perimeter. "Your people," Charlotte murmured, anxiety flooding her veins. "Our people now," Toro corrected. "If you still agree to our arrangement." Charlotte took a deep breath. "I do." Toro studied her face, seeming to search for any hesitation. "Then come. We will be married before the sun sets." With each step toward the camp, Charlotte felt the eyes of the Apache turn toward them. Women paused in their work, children stopped playing, warriors straightened to attention. Toro walked with his head high, not exactly proud, but unquestionably dignified. An elderly woman emerged from the largest wickiup, her face deeply lined, her bearing regal despite her age. "My grandmother," Toro explained quietly. "She is the wisdom of our clan." The old woman approached, her dark eyes taking in Charlotte's disheveled appearance, her torn dress, her bandaged feet. Without warning, she reached out and took Charlotte's face between weathered hands, turning it as if examining merchandise. Charlotte stood rigid, fighting the urge to pull away. The woman spoke in Apache, sharp, musical sounds that Charlotte couldn't begin to understand. Toro responded in the same language, his tone respectful but firm. Whatever he said caused the old woman's eyebrows to rise. She dropped her hands from Charlotte's face and circled her slowly, continuing to speak. Charlotte caught the word Toro several times, each utterance accompanied by what sounded like a question. Finally, the grandmother stopped before Charlotte again and switched to heavily accented English. "My grandson says you will be his wife, that he found you alone after white men destroyed your home." "Yes," Charlotte confirmed, finding her voice. "That's true. Why should we welcome you? A white woman. The army hunts us, kills us. Your kind takes our land." Charlotte met the old woman's gaze. "I have no kind anymore. Those you speak of killed everyone I knew, burned everything I had. I seek only survival and offer respect in return." The grandmother's eyes narrowed, evaluating. Then she spoke to Toro again in Apache. He responded with a single word. "Come," the old woman said to Charlotte. "If you are to be wife to Toro, you cannot look like a white teacher. The spirits must bless this union before the moon rises." What followed was both humiliating and transformative. In the grandmother's wickiup, Charlotte was stripped of her torn dress and undergarments. The old woman and two younger women scrubbed her skin with herbs and water, combed and braided her hair, and dressed her in a simple buckskin dress adorned with beadwork. Throughout the process, they spoke among themselves in Apache, occasionally laughing in a way that made Charlotte certain she was the subject of their amusement. When they finished, the grandmother held up a polished piece of metal that served as a mirror. Charlotte barely recognized herself. The sunburned, dusty white woman had been transformed into something else. Not Apache, certainly, but no longer the Boston schoolteacher either. "Now," the grandmother said, "you will be married." Outside, the tribe had gathered in a circle. Toro stood in the center, dressed now in ceremonial buckskins, his chest bare, painted with red and white symbols. Charlotte was led to stand before him, acutely aware of the stares from all sides. The ceremony was brief and conducted in Apache, with the grandmother officiating. Charlotte understood none of the words, but recognized the solemnity of the moment. Toro took her hands in his touch firm but not crushing. His eyes never left hers as the grandmother bound their wrists together with a leather cord. When it was over, the tribe erupted in calls and whoops that Charlotte supposed were congratulatory, though some faces remained suspicious, others openly hostile. Toro led her to a wickiup set, slightly apart from the others. "This is your home now," he said simply, holding open the entrance flap. Inside was sparse but comfortable, furs for sleeping, a small fire pit in the center, baskets containing supplies. Charlotte stood awkwardly in the middle, suddenly very aware that they were alone, married in what was essentially a bedroom. As if reading her thoughts, Toro moved to the far side of the wickiup. "I will sleep there," he said, indicating a space by the entrance. "You will have privacy there." He nodded to a sleeping area partially screened by a hanging blanket. Charlotte nodded, relief mingling with an unexpected twinge of something else. "Thank you for honoring our agreement." Toro studied her for a moment. "Rest now. Tomorrow you will learn your duties as a wife of the people." With that, he stepped outside, leaving Charlotte alone to contemplate the extraordinary turn her life had taken. From respected schoolteacher to homeless survivor to Apache wife, all in the span of a week. As she lay on the surprisingly comfortable fur bed that night, Charlotte heard Toro return and settle in his separate sleeping area. The sounds of the camp gradually quieted. In the darkness, she finally allowed the tears she had been holding back, tears for her lost students, for the townspeople who had welcomed her, for the life she had built and lost. And somewhere in those tears was uncertainty about the life she had just committed to, however temporarily, with a man as unknowable as the desert itself. Days turned to weeks in the Apache camp. Each morning, Charlotte rose before dawn to join the other women at the stream. Where they collected water and washed clothes in silence, that was broken only by occasional words in Apache that she couldn't understand. The women's attitude toward her ranged from curiosity to outright hostility, but none made any effort to communicate beyond necessary gestures. Toro's grandmother, whom she learned to call Grandmother Nijoni, was the exception. The old woman had appointed herself Charlotte's reluctant instructor, teaching her the basic skills needed for survival in the tribe. "No, no," Grandmother Nijoni scolded, as Charlotte struggled to grind corn between stones. "You will break your wrists working so hard. Let the stone do the work." Charlotte adjusted her technique, sweat trickling down her temples in the midday heat. "Like this?" The old woman grunted what might have been approval. "For a white woman, you are not entirely useless." Coming from Grandmother Nijoni, this was high praise indeed. True to his word, Toro maintained a respectful distance. He left their wiki-up before dawn each day, and often returned only after Charlotte had retired behind her privacy screen. The few times they were together, his conversation was limited to practical matters, warnings about not wandering too far, instructions on which plants to avoid, brief explanations of tribal customs she must observe. Yet Charlotte often felt his eyes on her as she worked among the women, a watchfulness that wasn't threatening but attentive, as if he were constantly evaluating her adjustment to life among his people. One evening, as Charlotte sat outside their wiki-up, mending a torn basket under Grandmother Nijoni's instruction, she became aware of tension rippling through the camp. Warriors gathered in urgent consultation, women hurried children inside, and even the dogs seemed to sense the change, growing restless and alert. Toro approached, his expression more severe than usual. "Go inside," he instructed. "Stay there until I return." "What's happening?" Charlotte asked, setting aside her work. "Soldiers. A patrol approaches from the north." Fear clutched at Charlotte's heart. "Will there be fighting?" "We will hide. This camp is well concealed, but we must be cautious." His eyes lingered on her pale skin and light brown hair, which even in braids marked her as distinctly non-Apache. "You especially must remain out of sight." Understanding dawned. "Because I'm white. They would think your people kidnapped me." Toro nodded once. It would give them the excuse they seek. That night, Charlotte listened to the distant sounds of horses and men's voices, thankful for the hidden location of the camp and the discipline with which the Apache maintained absolute silence, even the smallest children somehow understanding the gravity of the situation. Toro did not return until well after midnight. Charlotte, unable to sleep, had waited behind her screen, alert to every sound. She heard him enter the wiki-up and moved to peek around the blanket. He stood silhouetted against the dying embers of the fire, removing his weapons. In the dim light, she saw something dark glistening on his arm. "You're hurt," she said, stepping fully into view. Toro glanced at his upper arm, where a deep cut was bleeding freely. "It is nothing." Charlotte had spent enough time among frontiersmen to recognize the stubborn pride of men in pain. "Sit down and let me look at it, please." To her surprise, he complied, lowering himself beside the fire. Charlotte quickly gathered water and clean cloths, kneeling before him to examine the wound. "What happened?" she asked as she gently cleaned away the blood. A soldier saw movement, shot blindly into the brush. Charlotte's hands stilled. "You could have been killed." "But I was not." His voice remained even, though she felt his muscles tense as she probed the wound. "It needs stitches," she determined. "Grandmother Nijoni is asleep, and this is bleeding heavily." Charlotte stood and retrieved the small sewing kit she had managed to bring from Copper Ridge. "I've done this before, for injured miners." Toro studied her face for a long moment, then nodded his consent. Working quickly by firelight, Charlotte sterilized her needle in the flames and prepared a thin thread. "This will hurt," she warned. "Pain is a teacher," Toro replied stoically. Charlotte began her work, impressed by his stillness as the needle pierced his skin again and again. Only the slight flaring of his nostrils betrayed any discomfort. Up close like this, she couldn't help but notice the details of him, the intricate tattoo that circled his right bicep, the old scars that mapped untold stories across his copper skin, the unexpected softness of his black hair where it brushed against her fingers. "Why did you agree to marry me?" The question escaped her lips before she could reconsider. Toro's dark eyes fixed on her face. "You needed protection." "There are many who need protection in this world," Charlotte countered, tying off another stitch. "Why me?" He was silent so long she thought he would not answer. Then so quietly she almost missed it. "I know what it is to lose everything." Charlotte's hands paused in their work. "What did you lose?" "My wife, my son." His voice remained steady, but something in his eyes reflected a pain deeper than the physical discomfort of her needle. 3 winters ago, smallpox brought by traders. The revelation stunned her. In all their time together, he had never mentioned a family. "I'm sorry," she whispered, genuinely moved by this glimpse of his private grief. Toro nodded once, accepting her sympathy without comment. "Is that why—" Charlotte hesitated, then pressed on. "Why you said you wouldn't expect certain things from our marriage? Because you still mourn them." His gaze intensified. "I made that promise because it was what you needed to hear. Because you had suffered enough violence from men." The perceptiveness of his observation, and the respect it implied, caught Charlotte off guard. She finished the last stitch in silence, then bandaged his arm with clean cloth. "Thank you," Toro said as she tied off the bandage. "You're welcome," Charlotte replied, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, of the intimacy of tending his wound in the quiet darkness of their shared home. Something shifted in Toro's expression, a softening almost imperceptible in the dim light. For a moment neither moved, caught in an unexpected current of connection. Then Toro rose in one fluid motion, breaking the spell. "You should rest. Tomorrow will bring new challenges." Charlotte retreated behind her screen, but sleep remained elusive. Her mind replayed their conversation, filling in new dimensions to the stoic warrior she had married. He had been a husband, a father. He had loved and lost. Somehow knowing this made him more human to her, and therefore more dangerous to her resolve to keep this arrangement purely practical. The following days brought increased tension to the camp. Scouts reported that the soldier patrol had established a temporary base just 10 miles away. Too close for comfort. The tribe prepared to relocate, packing their few possessions and readying for the journey to their winter grounds earlier than planned. Charlotte worked alongside the other women, learning to dismantle the wiki-up efficiently and pack the household items onto travois. To her surprise, some of the younger women had begun to speak to her in halting English or through gestures, teaching her essential Apache words and correcting her pronunciation with giggling amusement. On the 3rd night of preparation, as Charlotte sat with the women preparing food for the journey, a commotion at the edge of camp drew everyone's attention. 2 warriors rode in at full gallop, speaking urgently to the tribal council that gathered to meet them. Toro found her shortly after, his expression grave. "Come," he said, taking her arm and leading her away from the curious stares of the others. When they were alone, he spoke in a low, urgent tone. "The Lancaster gang has been seen nearby. They are working with the soldiers now. Scouts, they claim, but they are showing photographs. Looking for survivors from the town." Charlotte's blood turned to ice. "Looking for me?" "Yes. One of our scouts overheard them describing a schoolteacher who escaped. They offer rewards for information." Fear threatened to overwhelm her. "We have to leave now." "No," Toro said firmly. "They patrol the trails we would need to take. The tribe would be at risk, especially with you among us." "Then I should go," Charlotte said, the words tearing from her throat. "Draw them away from your people." Toro's hand closed around her wrist, surprisingly gentle despite his obvious tension. "You would be captured within a day." "What choice do we have?" she demanded, panic rising. His eyes held hers, steady and certain. "You must become Apache in truth, not just in appearance." "What do you mean?" "A ceremony. Sacred. It would bind you to the people in the eyes of the spirits. Make you one of us in ways the marriage alone does not." Charlotte stared at him, trying to comprehend. "How would that help? If we are stopped, by soldiers or others, you would be my wife in all ways visible. Your movements, your behavior, your understanding of our ways would show them you are not a captive, but a willing member of the tribe." "Can such a thing be learned so quickly?" "Not learned. Transformed." He hesitated. "It is not something done lightly. Once joined to the people this way, a part of you will always belong to us, to this land." The weight of his words settled over Charlotte. What he proposed was more than a disguise. It was an initiation, a surrender of her old identity. Yet what was that identity worth now? The woman who had taught school in Copper Ridge was gone, along with the town itself. "What must I do?" she asked softly. The ceremony began at dusk. Under Grandmother Nijoni's direction, Charlotte was purified in a sweat lodge, her body painted with sacred symbols, her hair adorned with beads and feathers. She was given a tea that tasted bitter and earthy, which the old woman promised would open her eyes to see beyond seeing. As night fell completely, Charlotte was led to a circle of stones outside the camp. The tribe gathered around, their faces flickering in firelight. Drums began a heartbeat rhythm that seemed to synchronize with her own pulse. Toro waited in the center of the circle, his body painted like hers, but with different symbols. When Charlotte entered the circle, he extended his hands. She placed hers in his, feeling the strength in his grip. What followed was both terrifying and transcendent. The drums, the chanting, the firelight, and perhaps the tea combined to create a sense of altered reality. Charlotte felt her consciousness expand beyond the confines of her body, connecting to the earth beneath her feet, the stars above, the people around her, and most intensely, to the man whose hands held hers. Visions came, of soaring with eagles over desert landscapes, of running with wolves through moonlit canyons, of standing rooted like ancient trees through changing seasons. And through it all, Toro's presence anchored her, his dark eyes reflecting the same journey, the same transformation. When the ceremony reached its crescendo, Grandmother Nijoni bound their hands with a cord of woven horsehair, speaking words that Charlotte somehow understood despite the language barrier. The tribe called out in response, their voices rising to the stars. And then Toro did what he had never done before. He drew her into his arms and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was not part of the ceremony. Charlotte knew this instinctively, just as she knew that something fundamental had changed between them. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft, the contact brief but charged with meaning. When he pulled away, his eyes searched hers, looking for rejection or fear. Charlotte found neither within herself, only a startling sense of belonging she had never experienced before, not in Boston society, not in the frontier town, not anywhere in her life. "Now," Toro said softly, "you are truly my wife." That night, for the first time, they slept without the division of the privacy screen. Though they did not touch, Charlotte was acutely aware of his presence across the small space of their wickiup, and of the new bond between them that transcended their original arrangement. The tribe departed at first light, moving with practiced efficiency through hidden paths in the mountains. Charlotte rode behind Toro on his horse, her arms around his waist, her body learning the rhythm of movement with his. The Apache traveled in small groups spread across miles, harder to track, harder to ambush. 3 days into their journey, they encountered their first test. A group of cavalry soldiers appeared suddenly around a bend in the trail, rifles raised at the sight of Apache riders. "Hold," the lieutenant in charge commanded, as Toro's small group came to a stop. "State your business in this territory." Toro responded in carefully measured English. "We travel to our winter grounds." "We have permission from the Indian agent." The lieutenant's eyes narrowed, then widened as they fell on Charlotte. "Ma'am, are you being held against your will?" Charlotte felt the tension in Toro's body. This was the moment they had prepared for, drawing on everything she had absorbed in the ceremony and in her weeks with the tribe. Charlotte straightened her posture and responded in the manner she had seen Apache women address outsiders, with dignity and reserve. "I am with my husband and our people by choice," she said clearly, her hands steady on Toro's waist. The lieutenant studied her, suspicion evident. "Your husband? You're claiming to be married to this man willingly?" "She is my wife," Toro stated with quiet authority. "We travel with my grandmother and cousins to join our tribe for the winter." Another soldier rode forward, his gaze fixing on Charlotte with disturbing intensity. "Lieutenant, this might be the schoolteacher Lancaster is looking for, the one from that mining town." Charlotte's heart lurched, but she maintained her composed expression. "I know nothing of any mining town. I have lived with the people since my parents died of fever 2 years ago." The lieutenant's gaze traveled from Charlotte's braided hair to her buckskin dress to the Apache symbols painted on her hands. "What's your name, ma'am?" Without hesitation, "Alope," the name Grandmother Nijoni had given her during the ceremony, meaning beauty of sunrise. The soldier who had spoken before dismounted and approached. "Let me see her up close, Lieutenant." Charlotte felt Toro's muscles coil, ready for action. The situation balanced on a knife's edge. Then another voice cut through the tension. "Stand down, Corporal." A cavalry captain rode into view, his uniform dusty from the trail, but his authority unmistakable. "Lieutenant, what seems to be the problem here?" "Sir, we encountered these Apache. The woman appears to be white. Johnson thinks she might be the missing schoolteacher." The captain studied Charlotte carefully, then looked to Toro. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Toro, it's been some time." To Charlotte's surprise, Toro inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Captain Reynolds, you two know each other?" the lieutenant asked incredulously. "Toro was a scout for us during the campaign against the Comanche in '62, the captain explained. "One of the best trackers I've ever seen." He turned his attention back to Charlotte. "And this is your wife?" "Yes," Toro confirmed. Captain Reynolds considered this, then nodded slowly. "The Apache don't take white captives these days. Too much trouble. If she says she's his wife, I'm inclined to believe her." He fixed the persistent soldier with a stern look. "As for Lancaster's missing schoolteacher, we have no evidence she survived the attack. Let these people pass." The lieutenant hesitated. "Sir, our orders are to maintain peace with cooperative tribes," the captain interrupted firmly. "This group has shown no hostility." He nodded to Toro. "Safe journey to your winter grounds." Toro returned the nod with dignity. "Thank you, Captain." As they rode away, Charlotte kept her posture straight, feeling the soldier's eyes on her back. Only when they were well out of sight did she allow herself to slump against Toro's back, trembling with delayed fear. "You did well," Toro said quietly. "The captain knew you," Charlotte murmured against his shoulder. "Yes." His voice held a complex mix of emotions. "During a time when I thought cooperation might protect my people." "And did it?" "For a season." The bitterness in his tone told her more than words could about his disillusionment. They rode in silence for some time before Charlotte spoke again. "The soldier who recognized me, he was one of Lancaster's men, wasn't he? Pretending to be a soldier." Toro's back stiffened. "Yes, I recognized him from the town, but he cannot act against us with the captain present." "What happens when the captain isn't present?" she asked, fear creeping back into her voice. Toro reached down to grasp her hand where it rested at his waist, a rare gesture of reassurance. "We will reach the winter grounds tomorrow. There, among all our people, we will be safer." The winter grounds were nothing like Charlotte had imagined. Rather than an exposed camp on the plains, the Apache had created a hidden community in a sheltered canyon. Natural caves augmented with brush wickiups provided homes for dozens of families. A clear stream ran through the center, and the surrounding cliffs offered both protection and vantage points for sentries. The tribe that gathered for winter was much larger than the small band Charlotte had been living with. As Toro's group arrived, they were greeted with calls and gestures of welcome. Charlotte noticed the curious stares she received, but they seemed more intrigued than hostile. "Many bands join here for winter," Toro explained as he helped her from the horse. "Some have never seen a white woman living as Apache." Grandmother Nijoni approached, speaking rapidly to Toro in their language. He responded, gesturing occasionally toward the mountains they had traversed. The old woman's expression grew concerned. "What is it?" Charlotte asked, when there was a pause in their conversation. "Lancaster's men are still searching," Toro explained. "Grandmother says other bands encountered them. They offer more money now for information about you." Charlotte felt the familiar clutch of fear. "They won't give up, will they?" "Men like Lancaster never do," Toro said grimly. "Their pride will not allow it." That evening, Charlotte was introduced to the larger tribal council, including the chief, a weathered man named Nai-Che, whose stern countenance reminded her of Toro's. The council listened as Toro explained their situation, occasionally glancing at Charlotte with expressions ranging from concern to outright suspicion. When the discussion shifted entirely to Apache, Charlotte lost track of the conversation, though she could tell from the increasing tension that opinions were divided. Finally, Nai-Che raised his hand, silencing the debate. He spoke directly to Toro, his tone authoritative but not unkind. Later, in their new home, a small cave enhanced with wickiup walls at the entrance, Toro explained the council's decision. "We will remain here through winter. In spring, Nai-Che believes we may need to travel further west, away from lands patrolled by the army and men like Lancaster, further from white settlements," Charlotte added, understanding the implication. Toro nodded. It would be safer for all. Charlotte sat on their sleeping furs, absorbing this news. And I would go with you? She studied his face in the firelight. Our arrangement was temporary until I could safely return to my world. Toro knelt before her, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. Is that still what you want? To return to a world that failed to protect you? That hunts you still? The question struck Charlotte to her core. What did she want? The life she had known was gone. Copper Ridge was ashes. Even if she found another settlement, another teaching position, the spectre of Lancaster would follow. And now, after weeks among the Apache, after the ceremony that had changed something fundamental within her, the idea of returning to white society seemed not just dangerous, but somehow hollow. I don't know what I want anymore, she admitted softly. Toro reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw, and touched her cheek, the first time he had done so outside of ceremony or necessity. Then stay until you do know. His touch ignited something that had been building since their ceremonial kiss, a warmth that spread through her body and settled low in her belly. Charlotte leaned into his hand, almost involuntarily, her eyes holding his. Toro, she whispered, uncertain what she was asking for. He understood nonetheless. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers for the second time since their marriage. Unlike the brief ceremonial kiss, this one lingered, deepened. Charlotte's hands rose to his shoulders, feeling the strength there, the solidity that had become her anchor, in a world turned to chaos. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were dark with an emotion she hadn't seen there before. Our arrangement, he said, his voice rough. It can change, if you wish it. Charlotte's heart raced. This was the moment when pretense could become reality, when their marriage of convenience could transform into something neither had anticipated. She thought of James in Boston, of his false promises and empty words. Then she looked at Toro, a man of few words but absolute integrity, who had never once broken a promise to her. I do wish it, she whispered. That night, their marriage was consummated with a tenderness that belied Toro's warrior exterior. In his arms, Charlotte discovered passions she hadn't known herself capable of, and afterward, cradled against his chest, she felt a sense of belonging that transcended culture, race, and all the artificial boundaries that had once defined her world. As winter deepened, so did their bond. Charlotte became truly integrated into the tribe, learning Apache crafts, cooking, and even rudimentary hunting skills. The women who had once regarded her with suspicion now included her in their circles, teaching her their language with patience that surprised her. Grandmother Nijoni observed Charlotte's transformation with grudging approval. One evening, as they sat together scraping hides, the old woman spoke unexpectedly. You have changed, she said in her accented English. When my grandson brought you, I thought you would run at the first chance. Back to your people. Charlotte worked the scraper across the deer hide. I've found that my people isn't as simple as I once believed. The old woman nodded slowly. The spirits saw this in you. That is why they welcomed you in the ceremony. She paused in her work, fixing Charlotte with a penetrating gaze. My grandson, he was dead inside after his wife and son were taken. Walking, eating, fighting, but dead here. She tapped her chest. Now he lives again. Charlotte felt heat rise to her cheeks. I never expected to feel for him as I do. Love comes like rain in the desert, Grandmother Nijoni said with unexpected poetry. Unexpected, precious, making new life where there was dust. The word, love, hung in the air between them. Was that what she felt for Toro? This fierce protectiveness, this deep comfort, this passion that flared with a mere glance. It was nothing like what she had felt for James back in Boston, a courtship built on proper manners and social expectations. This was elemental, like the land itself, harsh sometimes but honest and life-giving. As if summoned by her thoughts, Toro appeared at the edge of the central clearing, returning from a hunting expedition with several other warriors. Even at a distance, Charlotte could tell something was wrong by the tension in his posture, the urgency with which the men moved toward the chief's dwelling. Grandmother Nijoni noticed too. Go, she told Charlotte, see what troubles them. By the time Charlotte reached their cave home, Toro was already inside, gathering weapons with swift, economical movements. "What's happened?" she asked, fear climbing her throat at the sight of his war preparations. Toro looked up, his expression grave. "Lancaster's men attacked one of our hunting parties near the eastern ridge. 2 warriors dead. They took their scalps." Horror washed over Charlotte. "Oh, God. Because of me? Are they coming here?" "No," Toro said firmly. "This is not because of you. This is the excuse they wanted to hunt Apache, to provoke us into fighting so they can call the army down on all our people." He strapped a knife to his thigh. "We must find them first. End this before it spreads." "You're going after them," Charlotte realized, panic rising. "How many are there?" 6, perhaps 8. We will be 12 warriors." "Toro, please," Charlotte grasped his arm. "These men are killers. They destroyed an entire town." He cupped her face in his hands. "And they will destroy our people if we show weakness. This is our way, Charlotte. We protect what is ours." The finality in his voice told her no argument would sway him. This was the warrior side of him, implacable, bound by duty and honor to his tribe. "When?" she asked, her voice small. "We leave within the hour. We will return when it is done." His thumbs stroked her cheeks gently. "Be strong. Listen to grandmother. If—" he hesitated. "If I do not return, she will know what to do." Charlotte felt as if the ground were falling away beneath her. The thought of losing him now, when she had only just found this unexpected happiness, was unbearable. "Promise me you'll come back," she demanded, clutching his wrists. Toro's dark eyes bore into hers. "I promise to fight with all my strength to return to you." It was the most honest answer he could give. Charlotte knew this, even as it tore at her heart. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, putting everything she couldn't say into the kiss. When they parted, Toro touched his forehead to hers. "I go to fight for our future," he said softly, "for all that we might build together." Then he was gone, striding away to join the other warriors who had gathered in the center of the camp. Charlotte watched as the men painted their faces with war symbols, checked their weapons, and mounted their horses. She saw the pride with which the women of the tribe sent their men off, the stoic acceptance of what must be done. She tried to emulate their strength, standing tall as Toro rode past. He held her gaze for one intense moment, and then he was gone, disappearing into the winter twilight with the war party. The waiting was excruciating. Hours stretched into a day, then 2. Charlotte threw herself into the daily work of the camp, trying to keep her mind occupied, but fear was her constant companion. At night, she lay alone in their sleeping furs, remembering the warmth of his body, the security of his arms, the quiet rumble of his voice in the darkness. On the 3rd day, as Charlotte helped prepare the evening meal, a cry went up from the sentries. Horses approaching. The entire camp froze, women reaching for children, older boys for weapons. Charlotte's heart thundered in her chest as she ran toward the camp entrance with the others. The riders appeared through the narrow canyon mouth, Apache warriors returning, but fewer than had left. Charlotte scanned their faces desperately, the world narrowing to a single question: is Toro among them? And then she saw him, in the rear of the group, supporting a wounded warrior across his lap. Relief flooded her so powerfully, her knees nearly buckled. He was alive. Bloodied, exhausted, but alive. The returning warriors were greeted with a complex mixture of joy and sorrow. 3 had not returned at all. 2 others were badly wounded. As the tribe gathered around them, Charlotte heard the story emerge in fragments of English and Apache. They had tracked Lancaster's men to an abandoned mining camp. The battle had been fierce. All of the enemy were dead, including Lancaster himself, slain by Toro's hand. But the victory had come at a cost. When the wounded had been taken to the medicine man, and the initial chaos had subsided, Charlotte found Toro sitting alone at the edge of the stream, washing blood from his arms and face. His expression was distant, unreachable. She approached cautiously, understanding instinctively that he was still partially in the world of battle. "You're hurt," she observed, seeing a deep gash along his ribs that he seemed to be ignoring. Toro glanced down as if noticing the wound for the first time. "It is nothing." "Let me tend to it," Charlotte said, already gathering clean cloths and the healing herbs grandmother Nijoni had taught her to use. As she worked, Toro gradually returned from whatever dark place the battle had taken him to. His body relaxed incrementally under her touch. His breathing slowed. "Lancaster," she finally asked. Dead, Toro confirmed. He will not hunt you or anyone else again. Charlotte's hand stilled on his wound. The man who had destroyed her town, killed her neighbors and pursued her across the territory was gone. She should have felt relief, closure, perhaps even satisfaction. Instead, she felt strangely hollow. Did it bring peace to the spirits of your wife and son? She asked softly. Taking his life? Toro looked at her with surprise, then understanding. Revenge is not peace, he said simply. But protecting those I care for, that brings a measure of rest. He had almost said love, Charlotte realized. The word had hovered between them for weeks now, unspoken but growing. She finished bandaging his wound in silence, then sat beside him at the water's edge. I was afraid you wouldn't come back, she admitted. Toro took her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. I made a promise. Yes, you did. She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him, alive and whole beside her. They sat together as dusk fell, the stream gurgling softly before them, the sounds of the camp, children's voices, cooking fires, quiet conversation, creating a cocoon of normality around them. For the first time since the Lancaster gang had thundered into Copper Ridge, Charlotte felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to unravel. What happens now? She asked. Toro's arm encircled her, drawing her closer. Now we live, he said simply, day by day, season by season. It wasn't a declaration of love as Charlotte might have once imagined it. No flowery words or grand promises. But in its quiet certainty, its straightforward commitment, it was everything she needed to hear. That night, in the privacy of their home, they came together with a passion born of separation and danger survived. Afterward, as Charlotte lay in his arms, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, from Boston society to frontier schoolteacher to Apache wife. Each step had stripped away another layer of pretense, of societal expectations, until what remained was simply herself, Charlotte, loving a man from a world so different from her own that she would once have considered it impossible. I love you, she whispered into the darkness, the words coming easily now that she had acknowledged the truth to herself. Toro's arms tightened around her. And I love you, my Alope, he replied, using her Apache name that meant beauty of sunrise. From the moment I saw you standing alone against impossible odds, I knew your spirit matched my own. Charlotte smiled against his chest. Is that why you were so silent those first weeks? Because you were falling in love with me? A low chuckle rumbled through him, a sound so rare it made her heart leap. I was confused. I had sworn never to love again after losing my family, yet there you were, defying everything I believed about white women, about my own heart. And now? His hand stroked her hair with exquisite tenderness. Now I understand that the spirit sometimes gives second chances, new beginnings that look nothing like what we imagined. Charlotte raised herself on one elbow to look into his face, barely visible in the dim firelight. Is that what we are? A new beginning? Yes, Toro said with quiet conviction. For both of us. For our peoples, perhaps, if others could see what we have found. It was a hope that seemed both impossible and essential, that the divide between their worlds might somehow be bridged by love like theirs. A hope worth building a life around. Spring came to the Arizona mountains in a riot of unexpected color. Wildflowers carpeted valleys that had been barren just weeks before. Streams swelled with snowmelt from higher elevations. The tribe prepared to leave the winter grounds, packing their belongings for the journey to summer hunting territories. Charlotte, now 6 months into her life among the Apache, moved with the confident efficiency of a woman at home in her world. Her skin had darkened from constant exposure to the sun. Her hands had grown calloused from work, and Apache words flowed naturally from her lips, though she still struggled with complex conversations. You will need to tie that more securely, Toro advised as he watched her loading their belongings onto a travois. The path to the summer grounds is steep in places. Charlotte adjusted the leather bindings, smiling up at her husband. Better. He nodded approval, then surprised her by pulling her into a quick embrace. Much better, he murmured against her ear. Such public displays of affection were rare among the Apache, which made them all the more precious when Toro chose to disregard convention. Charlotte leaned into him for a moment before reluctantly pulling away to continue their preparations. As they worked, A commotion at the canyon entrance drew their attention. A rider had arrived, one of the scouts sent to ensure the path to the summer grounds was clear. He spoke rapidly to Chief Naiche, his expression grim. "What's happening?" Charlotte asked Toro, who was listening intently despite the distance. "Soldiers," he replied, his voice tight. "A new fort being built near our summer hunting grounds. Many soldiers." Cold dread seeped into Charlotte's bones. "Does this change our plans?" Before Toro could answer, Grandmother Nijoni approached, her face set in determined lines. "The council meets," she told Toro. "Now." The tribal council debated for hours. Charlotte waited outside with the other women, anxiety building as the discussion continued, with increasing volume and intensity. When Toro finally emerged, his expression was thunderous. "What did they decide?" Charlotte asked, falling into step beside him as he strode back to their dwelling. "We are divided," he replied, his voice clipped. "Some, like Naiche, believe we must find new hunting grounds further west. Others say we must stand and fight for the lands that have always been ours." "And you?" Toro stopped, turning to face her. "I believe in survival, in protecting what matters most." His eyes held hers with burning intensity. "You matter most." The simple declaration stole Charlotte's breath. "What does that mean for us?" "It means I have proposed another path. For those who wish to take it." He took her hands in his. "There is a place beyond the western mountains, a valley where some of our people have already gone, where the army has not reached, where we might build something new, a place of peace. You want to leave the tribe?" The idea shocked her. Toro was a respected warrior, deeply embedded in the traditions and structures of Apache life. "Not leave," he corrected. "Lead those who wish to follow. Create a new beginning away from this endless cycle of violence." Charlotte struggled to absorb the magnitude of what he was suggesting. "Because of me? Because I'm white and it complicates things for the tribe?" "No," Toro said firmly. "Because I have seen enough death. Because Lancaster's end brought no joy, only more emptiness. Because I want our children to grow in peace." Our children. The words sent a jolt through Charlotte's body. They had never spoken directly of children, though it was a natural assumption in their culture. The thought of a child with Toro's dark eyes and quiet strength made her heart swell. "Will they follow you?" she asked. "Who would come with us?" "Some, my cousins, their families. Others who are tired of fighting, of running." He touched her cheek gently. "But I would go even if no one followed. With you alone, if necessary." The depth of his commitment humbled her. "When?" "We leave in 3 days, before the main tribe departs for the summer grounds." The next days passed in a flurry of preparation and emotional farewells. To Charlotte's surprise, nearly 30 people chose to follow Toro's vision, mostly younger families and a few elders, including Grandmother Nijoni, who declared she was too old to run from soldiers anymore. On the morning of their departure, Chief Naiche performed a blessing ceremony for the splinter group. Though his face remained impassive, Charlotte saw genuine emotion in the old chief's eyes as he embraced Toro. "He is proud of you," she said, as they mounted their horses. "Even though he doesn't agree with your decision." Toro nodded, watching as the chief returned to the main camp. "He has walked the warrior's path his entire life. He knows no other way." He turned to Charlotte with rare vulnerability in his expression. "I hope I am not leading our people to disaster." Charlotte reached across the space between their horses to grasp his hand. "You're leading them toward hope. That's never a disaster." Their journey west was arduous. They traveled through territories unknown to most of their group, navigating by Toro's memories of stories told by elders, and the occasional guidance of friendly tribes they encountered. Twice they narrowly avoided army patrols. Once they were forced to hide for 2 days in a narrow canyon, while a group of hostile Yavapai warriors passed nearby. Through it all, Charlotte was struck by the change in Toro. The taciturn warrior had become a leader, consulting with others, explaining his decisions, showing patience with the elderly and children. He still maintained his quiet dignity, but there was a new openness to him, a willingness to share the burden of leadership. On the 20th day of their journey, they crested a ridge and saw it spread before them. A verdant valley nestled between protective mountains, with a river running through its center. Even from a distance, Charlotte could see the sparkle of water, the rich green of grass. the scattered stands of trees that would provide both shelter and building materials. "It's beautiful," she breathed, taking in the panorama. Beside her, Toro straightened in his saddle, something like peace settling over his features. "Our new beginning." They made their way down into the valley, the group's spirits lifting visibly as they approached their destination. Near the river, they discovered signs of recent Apache presence. Fire rings, temporary shelters, game trails, evidence of the small band that had come this way months earlier. By sunset, they had established a temporary camp beside the river. As fires were lit and shelters raised, a sense of accomplishment permeated the group. They had made it. Against all odds, they had found their promised land. That night, Charlotte and Toro walked along the riverbank under a canopy of stars. The air was cool but not cold, fragrant with sage and pine. In the distance, coyotes called to one another, lonely, wild songs that somehow made Charlotte feel more at home rather than less. "Are you happy?" Toro asked, his arm around her waist, holding her close against his side. Charlotte considered the question with the honesty that had become the foundation of their relationship. "I'm at peace," she decided, "more than I ever thought possible after Copper Ridge." She looked up at him. "Are you?" "I am whole again," he replied simply. "Because of you." Charlotte stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "Toro, there's something I need to tell you." She took a deep breath, suddenly nervous despite the joy of her news. "I'm going to have a child. Our child." For a moment, Toro stood absolutely still, his face unreadable in the moonlight. Then, in a move that startled a laugh from Charlotte, he lifted her off her feet and spun her in a circle, his usual reserve completely abandoned. "When?" he asked when he set her down, his hands gentle on her waist. "The baby will come with the autumn, Grandmother Nijoni thinks." Charlotte placed her hand over her still flat stomach. "She's known for 2 weeks but made me wait to be certain before telling you." Toro's hand covered hers, his palm warm against her belly. "A child," he said, wonder evident in his voice. "Our child." The raw emotion in his eyes brought tears to Charlotte's. She remembered what Grandmother Nijoni had told her about Toro's first wife and the son he had lost. This child would never replace them in his heart, but it represented healing, a future rather than just a past. "I never thought I would be a father again," Toro confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "After losing my son, I closed that door in my heart." "I know," Charlotte said softly. "Are you afraid?" He considered her question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Yes," he finally admitted, "but not enough to let fear steal our joy." They stood together by the river, his arms around her, her head against his chest, contemplating the new life that would join them in this new place. It was a perfect moment of peace in lives that had known too little of it. The following weeks were filled with the work of establishing their settlement. Under Toro's direction, the group built permanent wickiups and small mud brick houses. They planted crops in the fertile soil near the river, corn, beans, and squash in the Apache tradition, supplemented with seeds Charlotte had collected during their journey. Hunting parties explored the surrounding mountains, mapping game trails and water sources. By midsummer, their settlement had taken shape, a harmonious blend of Apache tradition and innovations, suggested by Charlotte from her knowledge of white settlements. A small schoolhouse was built, where Charlotte began teaching the children both Apache traditions and the English they would need to navigate the changing world. Most remarkably, they were joined by others, a small band of Yavapai seeking peace, a mixed-blood family fleeing prejudice from both sides, even a white trapper and his Navajo wife, who had heard rumors of a place where such unions were accepted. Toro welcomed them all, establishing only one unbreakable rule, that all who came in peace would be treated with respect, regardless of their origins. It was a revolutionary concept in a territory torn by racial violence and mistrust, but in their isolated valley it began to flourish. Charlotte's pregnancy progressed without complications. As her body changed, the women of the settlement surrounded her with care and advice, led by Grandmother Nijoni, who had appointed herself guardian of Charlotte and her unborn child. "The baby is strong," the old woman declared one evening as she pressed her gnarled hands against Charlotte's swollen belly. "A warrior's spirit like the father, or a teacher's wisdom like the mother," Toro suggested from where he sat nearby, carving a small wooden cradle. Grandmother Nijoni snorted. Both, perhaps, a new kind of strength for a new kind of world. As autumn approached, bringing with it the promise of Charlotte's confinement, an unexpected visitor arrived at their settlement. A lone rider, a white man, appeared at the valley entrance, his approach noted by sentries who quickly alerted Toro. Charlotte was helping with the corn harvest when Toro found her. "Stay in the center of the settlement," he instructed, his expression grave. "A white man comes. Alone." Fear, so long absent from their peaceful existence, returned in a rush. "Lancaster's men?" "I do not think so. But we cannot be certain." He touched her face briefly. "Promise me you will stay where it is safe." Charlotte nodded, her hand protective over her prominent belly. "I promise." She watched anxiously as Toro and several warriors rode out to meet the stranger. The settlement held its collective breath, women gathering children close, men reaching for weapons they had hoped not to need. To everyone's surprise, when Toro's party returned, the white man rode beside them, seemingly at ease. As they drew closer, Charlotte gasped in recognition. "Captain Reynolds," she murmured, remembering the cavalry officer who had let them pass months ago, who had known Toro from his scouting days. The captain dismounted at the center of the settlement, removing his hat as he approached Charlotte. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her advanced pregnancy, but his manners remained impeccable. "Mrs. Toro," he greeted her with a respectful nod. "You're looking well." "Captain," Charlotte replied, conscious of the eyes of the entire settlement upon them. "What brings you to our valley?" "I've been tracking your group for some time," he admitted. "Not officially, on my own initiative." "Why?" Toro asked, his posture tense despite the captain's seemingly peaceful intentions. Captain Reynolds looked between them. "Because what you're doing here matters, more than you might realize." He explained that the situation between the army and the Apache had deteriorated significantly in recent months. New commanders with little understanding of tribal ways had instituted harsh policies. Reservations were being established, places where the government intended to concentrate all Apache, by force if necessary. "It's going to get worse before it gets better," Reynolds said gravely. "But what you've created here," he gestured to the peaceful settlement around them, "this could be an alternative, a model for coexistence." "You want to tell your superiors about us," Toro surmised, his voice hard. "Turn us into an experiment for the white man's policies." "No," Reynolds said firmly. "I want to help keep this place secret, to protect what you've built." Disbelief rippled through the gathering. A white officer, offering to help shield them from the very army he served. "Why would you do this?" Charlotte asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Reynolds's weathered face showed genuine emotion. "Because I've spent 15 years in this territory. I've seen too many die on all sides. Because solutions won't come from Washington or from war chiefs. They'll come from people like you, people brave enough to imagine a different way." That evening, a council was held to determine how to respond to Reynolds's unexpected offer. Opinions were divided, with many distrusting any alliance with a military man, no matter how well-intentioned. "He could be setting a trap," one warrior argued, "drawing us into the open. If he wanted to betray us, he would have brought soldiers, not come alone," another countered. Throughout the debate, Toro remained thoughtfully silent, listening to all sides. When all had spoken, he turned to Charlotte. "What do you think, wife? You understand white men's ways." Charlotte felt the weight of responsibility in his question. Her answer could shape the future of their community. "I believe he is sincere," she said carefully. "But intentions change. Commanders change. We should accept his help but maintain our vigilance." Toro nodded, his decision made. "We will work with the captain, but on our terms. This valley remains our sanctuary, not a government experiment." When they conveyed their decision to Reynolds, he accepted it with evident relief. "I'll do what I can from my position. Redirect patrols away from this area. Perhaps help with supplies when possible." He looked around the settlement with genuine admiration. "What you've built here deserves a chance to grow." As Reynolds prepared to depart the following morning, he drew Charlotte aside. "There's something else you should know," he said quietly. "News from the outside world that might interest you." Charlotte tensed. "What is it?" "Copper Ridge is being rebuilt. Some of the survivors returned." He hesitated. "They speak of a schoolteacher who disappeared during the attack. Some believe she died. Others wonder if she might return someday." The news struck Charlotte like a physical blow. Copper Ridge rebuilt. her former life potentially waiting for her to reclaim it. 6 months ago, even 3 months ago, such news might have thrown her into confusion. Now, with Toro's child moving within her, with the life they had built together flourishing around her, the pull of that former existence felt distant, like a story she had read rather than lived. "Thank you for telling me," she said sincerely. "But my place is here now. This is my home. These are my people." Reynolds studied her face, then nodded with understanding. "I thought as much. But you deserve to know." After the captain's departure, Charlotte found Toro at the edge of the settlement, staring out over the valley that had become their haven. "Reynolds told you about Copper Ridge," he said as she joined him. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Charlotte slipped her hand into his. "He thought I might want to return." Toro's fingers tightened around hers. "And do you?" Charlotte turned to face him, placing her free hand against his cheek, making him look at her. "My home is with you. My future is here with our child, with the community we're building." She smiled softly. "My heart made that choice long ago, even if my head needed time to understand it." Relief washed over Toro's features, followed by a love so profound it took Charlotte's breath away. "I would have let you go," he said quietly, "if it was what you truly wanted." "I know," she replied. "That's one of the countless reasons why I stay." As the first autumn leaves began to fall, their child entered the world, a son with Charlotte's lighter skin but Toro's dark, solemn eyes. They named him Dylan, an Apache word meaning thunder for the storm that had raged the night of his birth. Holding her son in the quiet dawn after his birth, Charlotte marveled at the journey that had brought her here, from terror to safety, from isolation to belonging, from a marriage of convenience to a love that had reshaped her entire world. Toro sat beside them, his face transformed by a tenderness few outside their intimate circle would ever witness. He touched his son's tiny hand with reverent wonder. "He is perfect," he whispered. "A new beginning." Charlotte leaned against his shoulder, exhausted but profoundly content. "For all of us." Outside their dwelling, the settlement stirred to life, Apache voices mixing with Yavapai, Navajo, and English, creating a harmony that would have seemed impossible just a year before. Children called to one another as they headed to Charlotte's school. Hunters prepared for the day's expedition. Women gathered to work on the final harvest before winter's approach. It was a community unlike any other in the territory, perhaps in the entire West. Not perfect, not without its tensions and disagreements, but alive with possibility. "Our son will grow in a world we have helped create," Charlotte said softly, gazing down at Dylan's peaceful face. "A world where he belongs completely, not half to one people and half to another." Toro nodded, his arm encircling her shoulders. "He will know both strength and compassion, the best of both his bloodlines." As if in response, the baby opened his eyes, fixing them with a gaze of such focused intensity that both parents laughed. "Already questioning the world," Toro observed with pride. "Like his father," Charlotte teased. "And his mother," Toro countered with a rare smile. Together they sat, a family forged in the crucible of violence and prejudice, yet transcending both to create something new and precious. Beyond their walls, their community, their experiment in harmony, continued to grow, one day at a time. 5 years later, Charlotte stood at the edge of the settlement, watching as riders approached from the east. 3 of them, moving at a steady pace that suggested neither threat nor urgency. Beside her, 5-year-old Dylan bounced with excitement. "Is it Captain Reynolds, Mother?" he asked, shading his eyes against the morning sun. "I believe it is," Charlotte confirmed, recognizing the officer's straight-backed posture even at a distance. "And he's brought guests this time." The settlement had grown substantially over the 5 years since its founding. What had begun as a desperate flight from violence had evolved into a thriving community of over 100 people, Apache, Yavapai, Navajo, and even a handful of whites who had married into tribal families or simply sought a different way of living than the increasingly divided world beyond their valley. Captain Reynolds had become their most unlikely ally, visiting several times each year, bringing news and occasional supplies, using his influence to keep army patrols away from their hidden valley. Though officially retired from the cavalry now, his connections remained valuable. Toro joined them, resting his hand on Dylan's shoulder. Their son had grown into a striking child, quick-witted and observant, with his father's quiet dignity and his mother's questioning mind. He spoke both Apache and English with equal fluency, moving effortlessly between the cultures that had shaped him. "Reynolds brings new people," Toro observed, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp as he assessed the approaching riders. Charlotte felt the familiar surge of protective instinct. Each new arrival represented both opportunity and risk for their fragile community. "Settlers? We will see." Toro squeezed her hand briefly. "Trust your husband's judgment, wife." The teasing affection in his tone made Charlotte smile despite her concern. Though their years together had softened some of Toro's edges, he remained intensely protective of what they had built. New arrivals were carefully evaluated before being welcomed into the settlement. As the riders drew closer, Charlotte saw that Reynolds was accompanied by a middle-aged white couple, their clothes dusty from travel, but of good quality. The woman's face was partially hidden by a bonnet, but something in her posture struck Charlotte as oddly familiar. Reynolds dismounted first, greeting Toro with the respect of long acquaintance. "My friend," he said, clasping the Apache's forearm. "I've brought visitors who have traveled far to find this place." The couple dismounted more slowly, the woman somewhat awkwardly, as if unaccustomed to horseback travel. When she straightened and pushed back her bonnet, Charlotte gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. "Eliza," she whispered, hardly believing her eyes. The woman, no longer the 10-year-old girl who had returned Little Women, but a young woman of 15, broke into a radiant smile. "Miss Whitmore, I knew you were alive." Charlotte moved forward as if in a dream, embracing the girl who had once been her student in a town that had ceased to exist. "How?" she began, pulling back to look at Eliza's face, searching for the child in the young woman's features. "My father and I were visiting relatives in Tucson when Lancaster's gang attacked Copper Ridge," Eliza explained, tears forming in her eyes. "When we returned, everything was gone. Everyone said you must have died with the others, but I never believed it." The man beside her, unmistakably the blacksmith's distinctive build, though with more grey in his beard, stepped forward. "When the captain here mentioned a settlement led by an Apache warrior and his white wife, a former schoolteacher, Eliza was certain it must be you." Toro approached, Dylan half hidden behind him, watching the emotional reunion with curious eyes. "You were Charlotte's student," he said to Eliza, his voice gentle in a way he reserved for children and those in need of reassurance. Eliza nodded, her eyes widening slightly at the imposing figure Toro presented. "Yes, sir. The best teacher Copper Ridge ever had." Charlotte felt tears threatening as she turned to her husband. "Toro, this is Eliza Miller and her father, Thomas. They are dear friends from my life before." She held out her hand to her son. "Dylan, come meet people who knew your mother when she was a teacher in the white settlement." The boy stepped forward with the natural confidence of a child raised in love and security. "Hello," he said politely in perfect English. "Welcome to our home." The simple greeting from this child, living proof of the bridge Charlotte and Toro had built between their worlds, seemed to touch something deep in Thomas Miller. The blacksmith's weathered face softened as he looked from Dylan to Toro to Charlotte. "We've heard stories about this place," he said. "A settlement where Apache and whites lived together in peace. I didn't believe such a thing was possible until the captain convinced us to see for ourselves." "It is more than possible," Toro replied with quiet pride. "It is real, built day by day with difficulty sometimes, but with conviction always." That evening, a feast was prepared to welcome the visitors. As was their custom, the entire settlement gathered to share food and stories, to evaluate newcomers, and decide collectively whether they would be invited to stay. Charlotte sat between her old life and her new one, Eliza on one side, Toro on the other, with Dylan sprawled at her feet, listening wide-eyed to tales of his mother's life as a schoolteacher. "She was strict," Eliza told him with a grin, "but fair, and she gave us books that opened whole worlds." "Mother still teaches," Dylan informed her proudly. "All the children learn from her, English and Apache and numbers and stories." "Some things don't change," Thomas observed, watching Charlotte with something like wonder, "though much else has." As the evening progressed, Reynolds drew Charlotte and Toro aside, his expression more serious than it had been upon arrival. "There are changes coming to the territory," he informed them. "Arizona will soon apply for statehood. The government is establishing firmer control, pushing tribes onto reservations with increasing force. Toro's jaw tightened. And our valley, our people? Reynolds sighed. So far I've managed to keep this place off official maps, but I'm just one man with diminishing influence now that I've retired. He looked between them. Your experiment here is working. People of different backgrounds living together, respecting each other's ways. It's what I always hoped might be possible. But you fear it won't be allowed to continue, Charlotte surmised, reading between the lines of his cautious words. I fear that without official recognition and protection, you remain vulnerable, Reynolds corrected, which is why I've brought a proposal, and these good people who might help implement it. His plan, it emerged, was bold in its simplicity. The settlement should petition for recognition not as an Indian reservation, which would place them under the Bureau of Indian Affairs with all its restrictions, but as a legitimate township, with Thomas Miller and other respectable whites as the public face of the community when necessary. A town where whites and Apache live as equals, Reynolds explained, officially registered, with legal protection under territorial law. They would never allow it, Toro objected. The army, the Indian agents, they want my people controlled, not equal. Not if they knew the full truth initially, Reynolds agreed, which is why we present it carefully. A small frontier settlement with diverse residents. Once established legally, what happens within your borders becomes harder to challenge. Charlotte looked to her husband, seeing the conflict in his eyes. What Reynolds proposed was a form of deception, yet it might be the only path to long-term security for their community. We would need to discuss this with the council, Toro said finally. All voices must be heard. The debate within the council was intense and extended over several days. Some, particularly among the older Apache, resisted any official connection to the white world that had caused them so much suffering. Others saw the practical advantages of legal recognition and protection. Throughout the discussions, Charlotte was struck by how much had changed in 5 years. The council now included not just Apache men, but representatives of all the settlement's diverse groups, women as well as men, elders and younger members. It was a governance structure unlike any in the territory, born of necessity and mutual respect. On the third evening, as the council seemed deadlocked, Grandmother Nijoni, now bent with age but still sharp of mind and tongue, rose to speak. The gathering fell silent instantly, honoring the wisdom of their eldest member. I have lived nearly 8 decades, she began, her voice thin but carrying clearly in the still night air. I have seen my people forced from our ancestral lands, hunted like animals, treated as less than human. I have buried husbands, children, grandchildren killed by white soldiers and white disease. She paused, her dark eyes moving over the assembly. I had every reason to hate the white world until the end of my days, yet here I sit, in a place where my great-grandson, she nodded toward Dylan, who sat solemnly beside his father, permitted to observe the council as part of his education, carries both Apache and white blood in his veins, where I have learned to see with new eyes. The old woman straightened, summoning dignity despite her frail frame. This place is neither Apache nor white. It is something new. If we must play the white man's game of papers and permissions to protect it, then we should do so, not with shame, but with pride in what we have created. Her words shifted the balance of the debate. By dawn, the council had reached consensus. They would pursue Reynolds' plan, with careful conditions to maintain their independence and way of life. In the weeks that followed, the settlement transformed outwardly while remaining true to its essential nature. A more conventional town structure was established at the valley entrance, simple wooden buildings constructed under Thomas Miller's direction that could pass inspection by territorial officials. Behind this facade, the heart of their community continued unchanged. Charlotte found herself in an unexpected role, drafting the official documents that would establish their settlement, now formally named Harmony on Reynolds' suggestion, as a recognized township. Her education in Boston, once seemingly irrelevant to her life among the Apache, proved invaluable as she navigated the legal requirements while carefully obscuring the full nature of their community. You are building with words what I once built with my hands, Toro observed one evening, as he watched her work by lamplight, carefully phrasing their township charter. Charlotte looked up, seeing the quiet pride in his eyes. We're building it together, she corrected. As we have from the beginning. Toro's hand brushed her cheek in a gesture of tenderness that still sent warmth through her body, even after years together. From the day a stubborn white schoolteacher stood before me with a small knife, refusing to show fear. Charlotte smiled at the memory. I was terrified, she admitted. But something in your eyes told me I could trust you even then. And something in yours told me you were worth protecting, he replied softly. Worth changing for. They had both changed, Charlotte reflected. The proper Boston schoolteacher had become a woman who moved between worlds with confidence, who could dress a deer as easily as she could diagram a sentence. The stoic warrior had become a thoughtful leader, who valued peace but remained ready to defend what he loved. Together they had created something neither could have imagined alone, not just their son, though he was miracle enough, but a community that stood as living proof that another way was possible. When the territorial officials finally came to inspect the newly registered township of Harmony, they found exactly what Reynolds had prepared them to see: a small, orderly frontier settlement with a schoolhouse, a blacksmith, a general store, and industrious residents. If they noticed the unusual diversity of those residents, or the traditional Apache dwellings visible in the distance, they made no official comment. Harmony was entered into the territorial records with minimal fanfare, just another dot on the expanding map of civilization pushing westward. But for those who called it home, the acknowledgement represented something profound, recognition, however limited, of their right to determine their own path. On the evening after the officials departed, the community gathered for a celebration that blended traditions, Apache songs around a central fire, alongside fiddle music and dancing from the settlers' heritage. Children of mixed parentage ran laughing between adults of all backgrounds. Food from multiple cultural traditions was shared freely. As twilight deepened into night, Charlotte found herself standing slightly apart, watching the celebration with a full heart. 5 years ago, she had lost everything she thought defined her life. That loss had led her here, to a happiness deeper and more authentic than anything she had known before. Toro appeared beside her, their shoulders touching in the comfortable intimacy of long partnership. "What are you thinking, Alope?" he asked, using her Apache name as he often did in private moments. "I'm thinking about journeys," she replied, leaning slightly against him. "How the most difficult paths sometimes lead to the most beautiful destinations." His arm encircled her waist, drawing her closer. "And our journey. Is it complete?" Charlotte looked out over their community, at Dylan teaching younger children a game that merged Apache skill with European rules, at Grandmother Nijoni instructing young white women in traditional healing plants, at former enemies sharing stories and laughter by the fire. "No," she said with certainty. "This is just the beginning. In the years that followed, Harmony would face challenges both from nature and from the outside world. Not all who came seeking their unique community arrived with good intentions. The balance between traditions required constant attention, constant negotiation. The movement toward Arizona statehood brought new pressures and threats to their independence. Yet the foundation Charlotte and Toro had built proved remarkably resilient. Their marriage, begun as a practical arrangement for survival, had become something rare and precious, a true partnership of equals, bound by deep love and mutual respect. Their son grew into a young man who moved effortlessly between worlds, eventually becoming a vital bridge between Harmony and the changing territory around them. The township itself evolved from a hidden refuge to a deliberate example, proof that another way of life was possible on the frontier, beyond the binary of conquest or submission that dominated relations between whites and natives elsewhere. Visitors came from increasingly far distances to witness what many had deemed impossible: genuine coexistence and cultural exchange. Some stayed, adding new dimensions to the community's tapestry. Others left carrying seeds of the idea to plant elsewhere. On the 10th anniversary of Harmony's founding, as the community gathered for its annual celebration, Charlotte and Toro stood once again on the ridge where they had first seen the valley that would become their home. Behind them, the sounds of celebration rose, music and laughter, conversations in multiple languages, children's voices raised in games. "Did you imagine this?" Charlotte asked, gesturing toward the thriving community below them. "That day when you found me alone at the abandoned fort?" Toro considered the question with his characteristic thoughtfulness. "I imagined protecting you," he finally said. "I did not imagine how you would protect me in return. How together we would build something neither of us could have created alone." Charlotte took his hand, the same hand that had once killed to defend her, that had helped bring their son into the world, that had steadied her countless times over their years together. "From survival to love to purpose," she mused. Our journey, Toro agreed, turning to face her fully. In the golden light of sunset, she could still see traces of the stern warrior who had first appeared behind her that desperate day. But his eyes now held a peace, a contentment that transformed his entire being. He brushed a strand of hair, now streaked with silver, from her face. "And I would choose it again, every step." "Even marrying an obstinate white schoolteacher?" she teased gently. "Especially that part," he replied with the slight smile that, even after all these years, was reserved almost exclusively for her. Below them, a child's voice called Dylan, summoning them to join the celebration. Hand in hand, they made their way back down to the community they had created, to the future they continued to build together, step by determined step. In a territory defined by conflict, they had carved out a space for harmony. In a time of rigid boundaries, they had proven that love could transcend the artificial borders of race and culture. In a world that insisted their union was impossible, they had made it not just possible but powerful, a testament to the human capacity for growth, for connection, for transformation. What had begun as a marriage solely for protection had become a love story for the ages, and the foundation for a legacy that would continue long after they were gone, rippling outward through lives touched and changed by their courage to imagine a different way. The end. Dear listener, you've carried so much, in silence, in strength, in love. Maybe, like Charlotte, life asked you to start over when you thought you were done beginning. But listen closely. You are not too late for anything that still warms your heart. Not too late to find peace. Not too late to change your days. Not too late to feel love again. Not just from others, but from yourself. You can choose softness, even if life made you strong. You can say yes to joy, even if you've had to say goodbye too many times. You can let go of old sadness, not by forgetting it, but by making room for what still wants to bloom. So tonight, breathe slowly. You don't need to prove anything anymore. The world may be loud, but your peace is louder. Let your heart rest, let sleep come gently. Let your soul feel protected, because it is. From all of us at Wild West Whispers, thank you for letting us be part of your evening. We're so glad you're here, and we'll be here again whenever you need us. With all our gratitude, the Wild West Whispers team. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Your presence means more than we can express. We kindly invite you to subscribe to our channel, leave a comment with your reflections like the video, and share it with someone who would be moved by a story of healing, courage, and unexpected love. Your support helps us to stay inspired and continue creating stories filled with emotion, redemption, and powerful turning points. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another story from our channel. Click and let yourself be surprised by another unforgettable journey like this one. Thank you for being here. The Wild West Whispers team.